right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Why don't you come up sometime, see me?
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
The stuff that dreams are made of.
Hi, Wendy here. Before we start off our episode today, I want to remind everybody to check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. Also, please leave a rating or comment on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. You can find us on social media by simply searching Silver Screen Time Machine, and please make sure you follow our podcast, Silver Screen Time Machine, anywhere you get your podcast. Thank you, and enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome again to Silver Screen Time Machine, Wendy's Classic Film Review. Today we have our guest, Mark. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Wendy.
How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. I've been a big film buff my entire life, growing up. I try to watch all the classics you can. I think probably freshman year of high school, AFI had just come out with the top 100. And I remember trying to knock the list off.
Yeah, so we are getting in our time machine and we are going back to 1964 and we are going to talk about
Dr. Strangelove. Happy 60th birthday.
Well, you didn't say the end. Dr. Strangelove or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb.
That's a mouthful.
You got to say the whole title.
Thing.
I believe they said this was the longest title to ever be nominated for Academy Award.
Yeah.
Not a lot of films have a 14-word title or however long it is. Speaking of Academy Awards, this film is nominated for 4 Oscars: Best Picture, Stanley Kubrick; Best Director, Stanley Kubrick; Best Writing Screenplay, Stanley Kubrick, Peter George, and Terry Southern; and Best Actor, well-deservedly, Peter Sellers. For
3 roles. He didn't win anything. It's a shame. Man.
Should he have gotten nominated for 3?
That would have been hilarious if he would have got...
Could he have been a
supporting role as well? Depending on, Strangelove, I guess, is the smallest amount of screen time, so it would probably be the supporting role. That would be good.
He could have been Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah, got destroyed by My Fair Lady, I think, that year. That pretty much swept everything.
Yeah, well,
The musicals.
Well, whatever. I won't say anything about that.
Okay.
Yeah, Rex Harrison versus Peter Sellers.
Nope.
Yeah, whatever.
Nope.
Okay. Anyhow, Peter Sellers never won an Academy Award.
No, never.
So this film, based on a novel, Red Alert by Peter George. He was writing under the pseudonym Peter Bryant. The reason why he was writing under a pseudonym at the time is because he was actually writing this film while he was in the Royal Air Force. He was a flight lieutenant in World War II, serving in number 255 Squadron RAF, flying night fighter missions over Malta and Italy. So he was actually involved in the war. And as I said, he was writing this book while he was in Royal Air Force. I guess they don't particularly care for their pilots to be writing novels.
Yeah, and apparently Peter Sellers, when I was watching the making of Peter Sellers, when he was doing his service, I don't know if he was in the Royal Air Force or not, but he used to do impressions of officers.
His officers.
And I was like, that was something that you could have got thrown in the
helped him. I think that helped him with his role here as Mandrake.
Oh, yeah. He was like a natural at that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So Peter George, he did work on the screenplay with Stanley Kubrick, although it's debatable how much work he did on it. Of course, the novel he wrote was very serious. It wasn't this black comedy that it sort of evolved into. As a matter of fact, Life magazine at some point made a reference to the screenplay acting as if Terry Southern and Stanley Kubrick had pretty much done the screenplay, and he was infuriated by that. He wrote a letter saying, hello, it's my novel.
Yeah.
I wrote a good portion of the screenplay. But the thing about Peter George that I thought was a little sad was that he actually shot himself at the age of 42. Maybe suffering from some post-traumatic stress disorder from his wartime or from his dealings with Stanley Kubrick. Who knows? Apparently Stanley Kubrick wasn't not the easiest guy to work with.
No. I guess there's not many things from back in his earlier days, but I was watching from The Shining.
Yeah.
And there was behind the scenes, and poor Shelley Duvall is just getting tormented.
Yeah, I heard that too. He's just an extreme perfectionist.
Oh, yeah.
And talked about sometimes taking up to 100 shots of a single scene. That's something that will drive actors crazy. Unless you're married, he should have worked with Marilyn Monroe. She was famous for wanting.
I have the 40th anniversary edition of Dr. Strangelove, and then there's a great little pamphlet in there. It has a review of it by Roger Ebert, and he was talking about how many times he made George C. Scott do different takes, and then he did just like an anecdote about Billy Wilder was getting Jack Lemmon to do a little bit less on this take, do a little bit less. And he's like, what do you want me to do? Nothing?
So Kubrick wound up purchasing the rights to the book for a measly $3,500, which in 1964, I mean, I don't know what Peter George was thinking.
That's a house there.
He should have held out for a heck of a lot more money than that.
Yeah.
You were purchasing screenplays for $24,000 back in even the 50s, and this is 1964. Yeah. So when Kubrick originally got the rights to the book, he started to write a screenplay called The Edge of Doom with his partner, who at the time, his name was James B. Harris, who we talked about in the Bedford incident, actually still alive, James B. Harris. I think he's like 95 years old. Yeah. So I think that's always interesting. But what happened was James B. Harris wound up leaving the partnership. He wanted to go pursue his own sort of thing. And so then Stanley Kubrick called in Terry Southern to help him with the screenplay. We're going to have a lot of people in this particular segment that served in wars. Terry Southern served in the U.S. Army in World War II as a demolition technician. Now, that's no easy job. That's a dangerous job. He was stationed in England, and he received the Bronze Star. He's also known for his novels, Candy and The Magic Christian. He was brought to the attention of Kubrick by Peter Sellers, and he would work with Peter Sellers several other times. In fact, it was said that Peter Sellers paid Terry Southern to help him with some of his lines on the Pink Panther, but he kind of paid him on the down low, just, hey, give me some good lines here. And Terry Southern was also nominated for an Oscar for Easy Rider. He was known for Barbarella and The Cincinnati Kid as well. Any thoughts on Terry Southern?
Apparently, Kubrick was going to do just the movie straight and make it serious. And he turned, I think at one point he went to Terry Southern. I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is a comedy. This is satire. He came up with a lot of, I guess Terry was a little bit like a wild card, I guess, and he had a lot of good ideas for that. Yeah.
He was kind of this hippie guy living in the Greenwich Village at the time, hanging out with people like Andy Warhol, that kind of person, I guess. So kind of this hippie type lifestyle. Were the hippies yet?
Were they beatniks? I don't know. Were the hippies yet in
not yet.
60s?
I think it was early days, prior to hippie days. He's on his way to hippiness. But anyhow, yeah, he was actually very comical. He was very good at comedy writing, actually. So most of the comedy writing in this, I believe, the credit belongs to Terry Southern. And, of course, some of it also belongs to Peter Sellers because he improvised almost all of his
I think everything. I think they had a rough outline, I guess, for whatever he was going to go with. And then him and Kubrick just came up on the day, just he'd let him go.
Yeah, that's exactly. Just let Peter Sellers do Peter Sellers.
You don't try to... I guess you give them the parameters of the box, and whenever you're in there, you do whatever you want, man.
Yeah, because Kubrick, known for his making people do million takes, Peter Sellers was like, "What's that all about? I don't do that." What do you mean a million takes? I can do 2 takes for you, and I'm pretty much done. So he was really puzzled by that. Now, another person I think is interesting to talk about, the production designer, Ken Adams, designed that big, beautiful war room, which was quite amazing.
Yeah, it was supposed to be and during the documentary, it was supposed to be 2 levels. I think they were supposed to have people like looking over them, and then he made Ken Adams redo the whole thing.
He did make Ken Adams, after he had spent like a lot of times. But they said the war room set was 130 foot long, 100 foot wide, and 35 foot high. And that big table they all sit around was 22 feet in diameter. And
I love with that, he's like, can we put this in some green felt on there?
They put a green tablecloth to simulate a poker table.
What a wonderful analogy there. It's like these men are just at the turn of a card, but you're pushing a button and can annihilate the world.
Like it's a poker game. Yeah. But of course it's in black and white, so you can't see the green. But I think it was more for the actor's mindset. A little bit more about Ken Adams. He was actually German. His original name was Klaus. His family was Jewish, and they fled to Britain with Ken as a child to escape Nazi persecution. After school, he worked in an architectural firm that specialized in building bomb shelters. When World War II broke out, he was able to join the Pioneer Corps despite being German to help design the bomb shelters. He was eventually allowed to join the RAF and flew bombing missions over Europe. He was only one of 3 Germans allowed in the RAF. Another one was his brother.
Okay, yeah. Maybe it'd be kind
And
of like,
it was quite dangerous for the Germans to actually be in the British Army, because if they were captured by the Germans, they weren't sent to a prison camp. They were executed for treason. So, yeah, taking chances. Also, another thing they had to do was create a set of the interior of a B-52 bomber. Not very easy.
Not very easy, but apparently he nailed it. A lot of stuff.
Yeah, nailed it to the point that they actually thought that they used illegal methods to obtain.
I think the Air Force showed up and just observe and look, see what they did. And they were like, they turned white or something.
That's what they said. They turned white and ran off. And then he got a letter saying, how did you recreate this? You know, because there was a chance that the FBI they were going to put the FBI on them. But allegedly they didn't use any illegal methods.
They had one still frame they went off of or something,
and they just created it, but apparently they did almost perfectly. He is a 5-time Oscar nominee, and he won twice for Barry Lyndon. This is a Stanley Kubrick film.
I've seen a few, but I haven't seen them all.
I don't know. I wasn't familiar with that either.
That was probably late 70s, I think.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with that film, and I'm not sure. I think Lyndon is the way to say it. And he also won for The Madness of King George, which is a more recent film. He was known for his James Bond films. He did almost all the sets on all the James Bond films in the early days. And he did approximately 7 James Bond films in total, and he lived to be 95 years old. As a matter of fact, a lot of the crew in this particular movie for some reason lived to be very old, so I'm not exactly sure. So Gilbert Taylor, this is our cinematographer. We actually had him also in the Bedford Incident. He was the cinematographer on the Bedford Incident. His paternal uncle was a newsreel cameraman and started Gilbert's interest in camera work during his 6-year service in World War II as an officer in the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve. He became an operational cameraman flying in Avro Lancaster bombers, documenting the damage after British bombing raids. That was his job. One of the things he had to do, like you said, the second camera or the second unit work, he had to go to the Arctic and get all these shots flying over Greenland for the projection for when they were going to be doing back projection or rear projection. And so they were in the Arctic for 3 weeks in very extreme conditions, and they were also taken for a spy. Their plane was actually downed by forced to fly down by some American flyers, and they had to explain themselves.
Yeah, in Greenland, and I think they had Dr. Strangelove written on the side of the plane.
Yes, they did.
Like, what is all?
Yes, they did, and they had to say, "Hey, look, we're filming a movie here," and they're like, "Well, really?" That was sure. That's a great excuse.
I've heard that one before, you know.
We're going over these these lands that are protected by the armed forces, and we're using a plane called Dr.
I work for Stanley Kubrick.
But our plane is called Dr. Strangelove, and we're filming. Yeah, I can see why they might be suspicious. He also had a lot of difficulty lighting the war room set, as you can imagine. They said he used the overheads as a fill and blasting in the key on faces from the other side. That's how they achieved that. He also worked on A Hard Day's Night for release on the same year, which was the Beatles movie. And he was also the cinematographer on Flash Gordon and Star Wars Episode 4. And lived to be 99 years old.
God bless him, yep.
Good for him.
Yep.
On to our editor, Anthony Harvey. He actually started as a child actor. Have you ever seen the film Caesar and Cleopatra with Vivien Leigh and Claude Rains?
Nope.
He played Vivien Leigh's brother in that film. He didn't think he could make it as an actor, so he turned to editing. He became highly sought after in Britain. He worked with Kubrick on Lolita. Actually, Kubrick asked for him specifically. He would eventually turn to directing and was nominated for an Oscar for Best Director for his first feature film, Lion in Winter, which is a great film. And he was recommended to the producer by Peter O'Toole for that film. And he would go on to direct Katharine Hepburn in several other films. He lived to be only a mere 87. Yeah, not as much as the others.
Yeah, you think it's like how many packs of cigarettes these guys probably smoked, and they lived probably. It's amazing how
they
how some of
smoked
these
and
people,
drank. Yeah. Our composer, Laurie Johnson, the soundtrack. He was an English composer and band leader who wrote scores for dozens of films and television series, described as, quote, one of the most highly regarded arrangers of big band swing and pop music, end quote, in England. He is known for the TV series The Avengers, which was shot back in like the 60s. And he also composed music for SpongeBob SquarePants. SquarePants.
Oh, wow.
That's very.
that's quite the rainbow of, from.
Did he do the little song? SpongeBob. How does that go? SpongeBob. SpongeBob, SquarePants, whatever. And he just died this January at age 96.
Wow. See, I went through a lot of like the cast, and I didn't really go through like who was still.
Yeah, they weren't as long lived.
Who was still living?
The actors didn't make it as well as the crew.
I think maybe one of the people on the B-52 living, and other than that,
James Earl Jones is still 93,
93, I think he is. Yeah.
And now I guess that brings us to our probably most important and last crew person that we're going to talk about is Stanley Kubrick himself. Nominated for 13 Oscars, but only won one of all things. He won for Best Visual Effects in 2001 Space Odyssey, which he was never won for director or screenplay or producer, all of which he did. He's kind of what you would call an auteur director.
Yeah. I think he even carried lights. He was like, we'll go back when we get to the
Peak Sailors. Yeah,
he could have thought the gloves, but I'm like, he did it. That wasn't something like you see your director doing that kind of work.
He was kind of a micromanager.
Yeah, so I'll do it.
Kind of a micromanager. He was a very extreme micromanager. I'm surprised he didn't try to act for the actors. He is known for A Clockwork Orange, I think is one of his most famous films, Full Metal Jacket. He was a great chess player and was a member of the United States Chess Foundation. He also became interested in photography as a child and would work as a photographer at Look magazine as an adult. He had a great interest in film and began creating short documentaries all on his own that he did. His first of which he was able to sell to RKO. He made several documentaries and films funded by various donors. He eventually met James B. Harris, as we talked about, while playing chess, and they formed a partnership which began Kubrick's Hollywood career.
I guess when we get to the cast, we'll talk about the chess and all that. But
you're dying to talk about George C. Scott.
Definitely, my lord, yeah.
They said he used to hustle people as a child. Yeah. That's how good he was, Stanley Kubrick.
And I'm just like, you get that big hulking guy, and you just get him so frustrated.
Yeah.
I know how competitive I can be, but something he thinks he's good at, but there's somebody better than him, and I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah, George C. Scott. We talked about him actually last. This is a George C. Scott segment of the Silver Screen Time Machine because we literally just talked about him in the last podcast, the Yellow Rolls Royce. Talked about how he insisted on bringing this famous world champion ping pong player to the set of Patton. And then he refused to stop playing ping pong until he won a set against this guy. So what are you saying about George C. Scott being competitive? Okay. So that's all of our crew, unless you have anything else to say about the crew.
No.
Let's go into a little bit about the plot.
Okay.
So we start right off at the beginning at this lovely message they put out there about, well, guess what? This isn't going to happen because the Air Force has safeguards. Don't you worry.
Sure.
Don't you worry about this happening.
This is to make this movie in, let's see, I think the Berlin Wall went up in 61. Cuban Missile Crisis was in 62.
Yeah.
He made this in 63. I'm like, what a time to be making and to scare the living daylights out of people.
The Cold War was a real fear. This is not, nowadays we're sort of like, oh yeah, whatever. But the Cold War was a very serious thing back then. People were terrified of communism.
People were building bomb shelters in their basements.
Yeah, exactly. This is not unheard of that people would be terrified by this. So says, hey, don't worry, the Air Force isn't going to let this ever happen. That's the very beginning. And then they have that funny scene with the credits with the plane fueling. How
PG is how they, I think it was the guy that did the credits. What's his name?
Yes, Pavel something or other.
Famous. He did a lot of work, cutting edge in the movie trailers back then. And he was like, do you ever notice how what men make are just really phallic? And it's like, he's like, you're right.
And then they got that fueling scene with the plane, which looks very suggestive.
Yes.
We'll just put it that way. It looks very suggestive.
Yes.
And the interesting way they write the credits, too. And that was very interesting as well.
Because I was rewatching this with my girlfriend, and she's like, "Isn't that from?" It was like Addams Family, and she's like, "Yeah, I think it is." And I'm like, "He did all these stuff from through the 80s and the 90s. Yeah, he did all these."
Yeah, it almost looks like a child has written the credits, but that's how Stanley Kubrick wanted it. So we start off the film. It basically starts off with Jack D. Ripper. Jack D. Ripper.
The cigar chomping Sterling Hayden.
Yes. Sterling Hayden and Mandrake, who is one of Peter Sellers' roles. So speaking of, I guess we should speak of Sterling Hayden. Sterling Hayden interesting fellow, Sterling Hayden. He started sailing at age 16. He served on fishing boats, yachts, and cruises. He loved sailing. He was a big sailor. Paramount just happened to see a picture of him on one of his sailing vessels, and they asked him to come do a screen test, which he did. And then they immediately signed him to a contract, just basically, I think, based on his looks, because he was 6'5", good-looking guy. He was billed as this Greek god, or the best-looking thing in movie. I mean, it was ridiculous. But he didn't really love acting, so he quit almost right away because he wanted to go join the army to fight in World War II. He actually joined the Marines, and he became an undercover agent with the Office of Strategic Services and would eventually win the Silver Star for his bravery.
That's crazy. He was a spy, and he's one of his most famous roles is he's a treason for treason.
And then it says he came back to Hollywood after that, but he also joined the Communist Party, and he was one of the actors. And I don't think this is a well-known fact about him. He was one of the actors that named names in the McCarthy witch hunts, and I don't think people know that about Sterling Hayden, because you hear that a lot about people get vilified for that, like Elia Kazan. But nobody ever says anything about Sterling Hayden doing it. It did say it was something he bitterly regretted. He was known for The Killing, The Asphalt Jungle, and playing Captain McCluskey in The Godfather. Is this his real voice? I haven't seen that much with Sterling Hayden in. Was he putting on a voice here?
I've basically only seen The Godfather with him. So basically, he does have that real deep, but I think it's a little bit
it's this
over
odd
the top.
voice where he's like, talks about
our precious bodily fluids.
Yeah, he has a very strange voice, and I'm thinking, is this his real voice? So I'm not sure if it is. Our precious bodily fluids. That's the way he's talking throughout the film.
There's just boistering. I don't know if he's.
I don't know. So anyhow, the film kind of starts out with Jack the Ripper and Mandrake. I can't remember what his actual title is.
Captain Lionel Mandrake.
Oh, he's group leader.
It was group captain.
Group captain. Yeah, that's right. They keep calling him group captain. He sort of calls Mandrake in, and he says, turn off all the radios, blah, blah, blah. He's giving them all these instructions, like there's a panic of some sort or something's happened. And Mandrake doesn't know what's going on. He just starts following instructions.
Because it's so funny and everyone reacts to this like, oh, is this really happening?
Yes, but then they question it.
You've been training for this for your entire life. Well, he is questioning the order because he's British, but he's a liaison. It was like a program where the officers would go to different bases or whatever. So, but he was the only one that's like, are you sure about that?
Yeah.
I hear music on the radio. There wouldn't be music on the radio.
He hasn't gotten to the music part quite yet.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. But at first he's like, oh, okay. He's kind of like, oh, something's happening. He doesn't know what, but he's following his instructions. And then the next thing you see is Major Kong. And this is a good character too. King Kong is his name technically.
Yes.
And he is played by the hilarious and interesting Slim Pickens.
The true cowboy.
A true cowboy. As a matter of fact, they said that James Earl Jones worked with Slim Pickens in a lot of the movie because they're both in the flight crew. But they said that he thought that everybody thought that he was just being in character when he would come in with his cowboy hat and his fringe jacket and his southern accent. But no, that was him.
Yep.
Actually, his original name was Louis Burton Lindy Jr. So he started rodeo riding as a youngster. He became an excellent rodeo rider. He would eventually become a rodeo clown as his job. He joined the Air Force in World War II. He was asked his profession when joining, and he said rodeo, but they thought he had said radio and made him a radio operator for the entirety of his service.
You hear that voice over the radio?
Right.
Well, golly.
Yeah. Howdy, folks. He got his beginnings in film by doing rodeo scenes or horseback riding stunts, mostly in Westerns. But Stanley Kubrick had worked with him in One-Eyed Jacks, which is what got him the role in Dr. Strangelove. After Peter Sellers had to back out, he was supposed to have 4 roles in this film. He was supposed to play this character of Major King Kong. But first of all, he was struggling to do the Southern accent.
Yeah, he was starting to get it, and then they were filming some things, and then he was just getting so overwhelmed with the 4th role. And apparently he was just had an argument on the set, and the B-52 set was apparently suspended 15 feet above, and he fell out, broke his ankle.
Yep.
Which is how Strangelove ends up in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
That they wrote that in. They wrote that in. I'm like, that's you play the hand you're dealt on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the point of having the broken ankle was he couldn't really get back into the cockpit,
Mm-hmm.
so then that's when Kubrick had to go contact Slim Pickens. But he did not like working with Stanley Kubrick. He had to do 100 takes of the scene where he was riding the bomb.
Yeah, it's got a chaff.
Yeah, wasn't a fan of that for somebody who was used to riding bulls
For
and
horses, yeah, I guess. But I guess how much?
Bucking-
those are pretty. Those were
yeah.
pretty wide. Those
bucking
bombs.
Broncos.
Yeah.
But I guess Kubrick at one point asked him to do a film with him, and he said, "Can I put it in the contract? I'm not going to do 100 takes of a scene." And Kubrick said no, and he said, "Okay, I'm not working with you."
Now I'm just picturing Slim Pickens in space, and he could have been in 2001. Or he could have been the voice of Hal. And
Yeah. That would have been, yeah. Hal would be giving instructions in this Southern accent.
oh, I'm sorry, Dave. I can't open the Bombay doors for you.
That would have been great. So anyhow, now we're to Major Kong, this fellow. He's in his B-52. This code comes over the radio, and the radio guy is saying, "Hey, there's this code, this planar." And Major Kong is like, "No, this isn't right. This isn't right." And he goes, checks it out, and he finds out it is right. And he's like, "Oh my God." And then this is when you'll see James Earl Jones. He has a line here where he asks, "Is this a loyalty test, do you think, or something?"
Mm-hmm.
And so you can watch for him there. This is James Earl Jones' first feature film.
Yep, he was mostly a theater guy, and then
He was a Shakespearean theater guy.
Yeah, because when they were casting, he knew he wanted George C. Scott.
Yeah.
And you saw him in Merchant of Venice and James Earl Jones.
Yep.
And it's like, bam.
You know, like, take him too.
Yeah.
Just take him along. Yeah, he was a great Shakespearean actor. They said he was one of the best at the time. He also served in the Army, James Earl Jones, except he served during the Korean War. And of course, I think we all know that he is best known as the voice of Darth Vader.
Yes.
Luke.
Well, Mustafa from
I am your father.
Mufasa from Lion King.
And he is still alive. That's the wonderful thing about him. So then finally, when Major Kong realizes this is a true thing, you see this whole change in demeanor. He gets this cowboy hat out and he puts it on. And then as soon as he does that, they start playing this music that they're going to play throughout the entire film. Every time you see...
You will get tired of when Johnny comes marching home again.
Dun, 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 dun.
I mean,
And they have like this very strong drum beat. And every time now that you see Major Kong, you're going to hear that song. As a matter of fact, I tried to listen. I don't hear much other music throughout the entire film.
No.
And I think he's really heavy-handed with that with that theme.
Oh, it's over. It's
Yeah,
just, you
I
get
think
annoyed
it's a
by it
bit
by the
much.
end. It's like, just drop the bomb.
Yeah, like please stop playing the song. But I just wonder that there's not really much other music other than that, and it's so strong in that every time you see him. And
Other than the 10 seconds that Mandrake, the whatever that is, jazz he plays on the radio,
Yeah.
that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's really not a lot of music. And why they chose Johnny Comes Marching Home, it's like an old Civil War song. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what's supposed to be
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure.
what's the point behind that. But I mean, it's not even like really a Southern song where you would say, oh, well, he's Southern, it's a Southern song. It's not really that even. But okay, I guess maybe Laurie Johnson really liked that song. I don't know. And this is what happens throughout the film is it's going to cut from scene to scene to scene to scene. You're just going to go back and forth to all the different scenes. So next thing that happens is they show this lady, Miss Scott. She's in a bikini. She's laying on a bed. She gets this phone call. She's relaying this information to this fellow named General Turgison that we don't see at the time.
Yeah,
It's a funny scene.
It's a funny scene because she's like basically almost she's the secretary, but she knows.
She's
everything-
secretary/mistress.
Mistress, she knows things before he knows it. You know,
Yeah.
it's just,
And the way she's talking to him versus talking on the phone
the
is
way
quite
she's
funny.
talking to him, it's like, is she with this guy too, or you know?
She's first of all she'll say, General Turgison said so and so wants this and that because she's screaming to him from the bathroom, and he'll yell back, "Tell him I'm busy, Freddie." He's unavailable at the moment. It's just very, very funny. And an interesting thing about the lady that played Miss Scott, her name is Tracy Reed. She is the stepdaughter of Carol Reed, the great director Carol Reed, that I did not know. And she was also in a shot in the dark with Peter Sellers.
Yeah, she was supposed to replace Diana Rigg on the Avengers,
Yeah.
and she didn't. Yeah,
Right.
didn't get it.
That's a shame for her. So she's telling Turgison. Yeah, you're needed. There's something's happening. You know, she's trying to relay this problematic thing that's occurring, and he's kind of not taking this very seriously. He's kind of like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, because that's when they went back to the script stage. Like he's learning this information while he's in the bathroom.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if he learned it in the office, it's a serious film. If he's learning it in the bathroom,
Yeah.
it's a comedy.
Yeah. So I think at some point he even just says like, well, maybe I'll walk down to the war room. I'll go to the war room and see what's going on. It's very casual, though.
It's very, well, I'll talk about the casual at that point because in the war room scene. But so he's in a Hawaiian shirt in his boxers or
the shirt's open.
The shirt's open. And I don't know if it's swim trunks or whatever. She's in bikini, suntan, and it's 3 a.m, I think they said it was.
That's right, because they do say it's like 3 a.m.
Does anybody sleep in these movies or what's going on?
Yeah, well, something else was going on for sure. But,
yes.
we don't that doesn't go, we're only in the 1960s. We don't go that far in films at this point. Early 1960s. Then you have this scene of, we're back to Ripper. He's talking on this intercom to the base, telling them we're sealing off the base. Don't let anybody in, even if they look like they're American soldiers, because the Russians are coming and they're going to pretend to be American soldiers and you need to kill them all. And everybody's listening real seriously to him. Everybody believes him. That's the thing. Everybody believes this guy in the beginning. Everybody's like, oh, okay.
You don't question
There's
your
no
authority,
reason to question him. I mean, to be honest, I guess that's part of the point is that, these people have too much power and not being questioned. But anyhow, then it goes back to Kong. Now he's reading the Plan R instructions. I like the shooting that the cinematographer did in the crew, the flight, the B-52. He cuts to a lot of different things, a lot of close-ups to the flight crew. And then you'll see close-ups of their face. You'll see it from the side angle. You'll see it from the front angle. And then they'll be making these instructions. I don't know what they actually say, like, turn on the detonator or whatever they say. And then they'll show the button, they'll show them turn on, then it'll be a quick zoom into it.
How detailed those consoles are. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way he filmed that scene.
Unbelievable. Yeah. The set design was great for that.
Yeah, but I love the cinematography there too. And it sort of like creates a lot of tension to me with the way he cuts around from face to face, close-ups to faces. He does a very similar thing in the Bedford incident. I can see a lot of parallels in the Bedford incident and Dr. Strangelove. Gilbert Taylor is the cinematographer on both. And like I said, Kubrick and James B. Harris used to be partners, and James B. Harris is the director of the Bedford incident. So I'm not surprised to see a lot of these coincidences. And then now it's going to go to Mandrake again. And this is when he realizes that the radio is, he's like, oh, the radio's working fine. And he thinks he's just going to go in and tell Jack D. Ripper, like, hey, by the way, buddy, yeah, it's all good.
He just stands up and starts locking the door. He's like, oh,
yep,
I lost this guy. I'm going to have to keep him in here.
Yeah, he's like, and he's trying to tell him, he's like, oh, well, let's get the recall code and bring them back. And Jack's like, no.
There's no going back.
Not going to happen. That's the way he kind of talks. That's not going to happen. And then Mandrake realizes that Ripper has locked him into the room, and he starts making these ranting speeches about communists. And another thing, again, the way they shoot him from a low angle. With the close-up on the face.
That scene is perfect. He's nails that speech with the chomping on the cigar and talking out the side of his mouth.
The precious bodily fluids. And the way he's shot. And then it's a difference in the way Mandrake is shot. He's shot straight on, whereas always Sterling Hayden is shot kind of from just below his chin almost. So it's really interesting. It's a really interesting job by the cinematographer. I really like what the cinematographer did in this film.
Is that like something like just either something's not right here, the angle, or what could that angle be saying?
Sort of, I feel like the low angles are usually used to make the person look more powerful and strong. That usually bigger, taller. So I think it was sort of, that angle was used to sort of show the power, I suppose, that he was, or also maybe to show that he wasn't mentally right or something. Yeah. So unfortunately, then we're going to switch to the war room. And then this is when the president, again played by Peter Sellers. This is Peter Sellers' straight role, though.
Yes, very, very straight. He was supposed to play it a little off. He was with a cold and constantly like with the inhaler and wheezy. He's like, no, you got to be, you have to be the one that's straight. But it's funny, he plays it straight with his, the generals and the whatever's there. But when he's talking to that premier, he's like a little kid that lives down the street, like he stole my toy. It's not my fault, Dimitri.
Yes, we're going to get to that scene too. But it's a really funny dynamic between Peter Sellers and George C. Scott in this film. Peter Sellers is being so serious and understated, whereas George C. Scott is like really over the top, which of course he did not want to play it that way.
Nope.
In fact, he's another one that would never work with Kubrick again because he didn't appreciate Kubrick making him act over the top because he wasn't that kind of an actor, but he is so over the top in this film. But it's very good for the comedic effect. I mean, it works for the comedic effect.
Yeah, because it was like, I think they told him like, okay, we're gonna practice crazy roles, the crazy like the making the facial tick and the chewing the gum, and he's like, he was filming it at the same time. Like, then they used that one instead of like the serious
and
ones.
he was not happy about that. Nope. George C. Scott was not the kind of person you want to make mad. That's
they said he was
kind of volatile is the word they use. It's a good word. We talk a lot about George C. Scott in the last one, so I'm going to sort of skip over him a little bit more in this one. So he's asking General Jurgensen what's going on. And when he's explaining what's going on, the way he's saying these things is so very casual. Like, well, what we believe has happened is, very casually.
Shout out Sarah. Hi, Sarah, my girlfriend. We were watching this, and she's that whole scene where he's, get me in touch with this. What about this? Well, I'm sorry. She's, how is everybody so calm? Like, oh, they're going to be in radar range in like 15 minutes. Like, she's like, what is happening here on this?
Well, George C. Scott, I think he doesn't even feel concerned. I think actually, in a way, he's kind of makes it very clear he hates the Russians.
At the end, he's like, well, this might be a good thing. We can catch up with the pants down, sir.
Yeah, exactly. He's not very upset about this at all. And every time that the president will say something like, this guy appears to be a psychopath. Well, we can't be certain about that until we have all the facts in, sir.
The facts. Look at the big board.
I know. It's just always he's saying things is quite funny, and the way the way they're working off each other is really, really funny. Mm-hmm. And Peter Sellers is so serious in this role, and he's just like, "What's going on? Well, we have to do this, and we have to do that." And George Scott's like, "Well." I don't really know about that.
What makes me laugh about Merkin Muffley, the president there, he didn't remember that he signed this order that a general could launch nuclear weapons. And you're thinking that could actually happen.
Yes,
I mean, how much that could happen, but it's how many people just rubber stamp things and just don't even look at what they're signing.
Yeah, and again, in the war room too, I like the way they're shooting. You get these sort of long shots of the war room, then intermixed with very close-up shots of the actors, especially George C. Scott and Peter Sellers. And they have the other generals, they're just kind of there. They don't ever say anything or do anything. They're just sitting there like faces next to, it's like very serious faces next to the thing. It's very interesting. He says at one point, well, Mr. President, it does seem like General Ripper may have exceeded his authority.
It does,
that was so funny. So their plan was that the president wants somebody to go. It's become apparent that the base has been cut off from all communication. He wants somebody to go over from a neighboring base or a nearby base to go in and get a Ripper on the phone because the president wants to speak to him. That's their plan at that point. And then you're back to the B-52s, and Kong is reading the items in the survival kits. This is kind of an interesting scene to watch because you want to watch his lips when he's saying this, because he's going to say at some point after he's done reading the contents, which includes condoms, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he says, this sounds like a good weekend in Vegas is what he says. But what he really said, and if you look at his lips, it says it was a good weekend in Dallas. They had to dub the Vegas in because unfortunately when this film was set to be released, that's when President Kennedy
November
was killed in Dallas.
November 22nd,
so we didn't want to say a good weekend in Dallas. As a matter of fact, they had to delay the release of this film because of that.
I was trying to think, is this one of the earliest examples of a major event changing something like this? You had to do like a quick re-edit.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about something modern, but the biggest thing from my generation is September 11th.
Yeah.
And I remember the first Spider-Man trailer came out in 2001, a few months beforehand, and it featured the Twin Towers a lot in that.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of shots in the movie about that. A couple months, they had to change the whole movie.
Yeah.
I'm like, I was trying to think maybe something in World War II. Yeah, something happened. I couldn't think.
Been.
Yeah,
I mean that's quite possible. But yeah, this was a very good example. They had to wait to release the film. They had to redub this line. They also wound up, since didn't actually happen, we can say it, but they actually wound up changing the ending.
Yeah.
Because of that. That was one of the reasons.
Because I think one of the lines in the pie fight, the president, our great president is dead, or something like.
It's something like has fallen, or something along those lines.
Oh boy,
yeah. So obviously they couldn't use that. And then at this point, You come back to the war room. Like I said, it's cutting back and forth from all these people. You're cutting back and forth from Ripper to Kong to the war room. It's just like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But this is when the Russian ambassador comes in.
Oh, yeah.
The Russian ambassador, played by Peter Bull, who is an English actor, which I think is apparent through a lot of the dialogue if you really listen. It's like an English accent, a little bit of a Russian accent, an English accent, a little bit of a Russian accent. I mean, he doesn't do a great job with the Russian accent.
And like, who knows how long it's been since Turgison got the news? So is it 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah,
and he's asking for fresh fish. I'm like, what?
Yeah, there's really you really don't get a sense of how much time has passed. But a little bit more about Peter Bull. Believe it or not, he was an officer in the Royal Navy in World War II, where he met and befriended Alec Guinness during that time. Oh, wow. He also played in The African Queen as the German commander of the Louisa, if you remember The African Queen. Yeah. It's the fellow, they get caught up in the ship and they ask the captain to marry them. He's the captain. And he played a German in that. And I don't know if his German accent was any better than his Russian. But an odd thing I found about him was that he was obsessed with teddy bears. Oh. And he had this huge teddy bear collection. He wrote several books about teddy bears. He looked like a big teddy bear, too. He loves teddy bears, this Peter Bull. But so anyhow, the Russian ambassador comes in. Now, Turgison does not like the Russian ambassador being, he's like, the board, he's clutching plans to try to keep them from the Russian.
He's going to see the big board.
Yeah, he's getting all upset.
He's such a petulant child, Turgison.
Yeah. Oh, he is. Yeah, he is. Because sometimes when the president scolds him, he does this sulky, this sulky face. But then the president turns around and Turgison is actually fighting, and they're fighting with the ambassador, which gives you one of the greatest lines in the film.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
You can't fight in here. This is the war room. Yep. So one of the greatest lines. But it's just a really funny dynamic between... And the ambassador is just very... Despite the fact that he doesn't really do a great Russian accent, he has this very deep voice. Mm-hmm. So then you cut back to Ripper. Now the armed forces are coming to the base to try to get Ripper like they were told to do. Yeah. But then the soldiers in the base think that it's the Russians disguised as Americans.
Where'd they get those uniforms at? They look like ours. Like, yeah. It is yours.
Yeah, and so they start firing at their own people, and that starts happening, and then it goes quickly back to the war room, and then this is when that scene you talk about when they call the Russian premier. And it's this very funny scene because the president does speak to him as if he's speaking a lot to him like he's a child. Yeah. Well, first of all, the ambassador says he might be drunk.
He might be drunk. He's a man of the people, but he's also a man.
And then he's saying, Dmitri, oh, I can hear you, Dmitri. Can you hear me, Dmitri? We can hear each other fine.
You're coming in fine.
Yes, I'm coming in fine. You're coming. We're all fine, Dmitri. Like, and he keeps talking in that way to him. And he's kind of trying to explain what's going on. One of our guys went a little funny, Dmitri, a little funny.
A little funny.
And then he's like, well, Dmitri, I don't like the situation either.
You remember how we talked about something going wrong with the bomb? The bomb, Dmitri. The hydrogen bomb.
It is very funny. As he's talking to Dmitri, there's a close-up shot of both him and Peter Bull, him and the Russian ambassador. That's all you see in that scene. Mm-hmm. And then it keeps shooting back to Turgison by himself, and he's making all these reaction shots to everything that the president is saying. One of the things I really like is when they said they have to call this place in Omsk.
Omsk information.
And he said, what is the phone number, Dmitri? Can you give us the phone number? And he's like, oh, okay, I guess I can call Omsk information. It's just really funny. And then the ambassador gets back on the phone with the premier, and then he starts talking about this doomsday machine, which they don't say very much about at that point, because now it's going to cut back to Mandrake and Ripper again. And this is when Ripper's sitting next to Mandrake. He puts his arm around him, and he starts talking about the
most uncomfortable scene in that movie.
Yeah. Starts talking about the fluoridation of water. He gets very, very upset about this fluoridation of water, and he goes on this
very specific too
long rant about it. And actually, I read that General Ripper's paranoia about water fluoridation being a communist plot is based on a conspiracy theory circulated by the extreme right John Birch Society in the 1950s and 1960s. They were quite influential in conservative politics at the time, and the fluoridation is a communist plot theory took hold in many rural areas of the U.S., with some small towns going so far as to not only ban fluoridation of water, but to pass ordinances requiring the arrest and jailing of anyone who advocated it.
And fluoride's just to help keep your teeth clean or something like that. I think that's what it was.
It is supposed to help your it's supposed to help your teeth supposedly. But I don't think we can say anything about conspiracy theories in this day and age. There's plenty of them around here these days as well. So he goes on this big rant about this fluoridation in water, and poor Mandrake is just Mandrake's trying to be sensible. And I think this is kind of a straight Peter Sellers role too. This isn't too over the top.
Oh, no, not over the top at all. Yeah, he's just a guy that's just trying to do his job, and he's just, as like the executive officer, he's supposed to bounce the orders, not question, but are you sure this is the right thing to do? You know, there's the chain of command, but he's just trying to just keep his sanity.
Yeah, he's trying to talk some sense into him, which is falling on deaf ears. And then all of a sudden, all these shots come in. They're starting to shoot up the window, and so Ripper goes and gets this big machine gun. I don't know my machine guns, but I don't know what
it's like a Browning M60 or something like that.
There you go.
But he keeps it in his golf bag.
That's right.
Of course he does.
He just rips it out and starts putting. He's like telling Mandrake, "Come help me with this belt." He said something, "the string in my leg," which he wasn't supposed to say that.
Something like it was something that everybody just kept laughing, but they kept. He's like, "Just keep going."
He wasn't supposed to say string, but for some reason Peter Sellers just said the word wrong, and then they just kept it in. Then that's what they're planning. He's planning to fire this gun, but then you go back to the war room, and then this is when the ambassador is explaining to everybody about the Doomsday Machine, and this is the scene where Turgison is like saying all these things, and then he runs up this thing and he falls down. And that Stanley Kubrick thought he did that as an ad lib, but really he just literally fell as an accident, and he just got back up and started, because that's what actors do. And Stanley Kubrick thought, "Oh, that's funny." He just threw that in there.
Keep going till you hear cut.
Yeah, and he just left it in there, so you see him fall. And then this is when we first get to meet Dr. Strangelove, which I read that Peter Sellers based this voice on an actual person named Ouija, a photographer from New York who was a friend of Kubrick's, I guess.
Yeah, something.
Actually, I saw a documentary with Peter Sellers that is actually on one of the extras for Dr. Strangelove. And they have this person talking. They have him talking on recording, and it sounds just like Dr. Strangelove. That Muppety, it's like a Muppety kind of voice. He almost sounds like a Muppet. Mein Führer. Anyhow, and he has this arm, this hand that cannot be controlled. And what I thought was really interesting about that, to be honest, is that it says that he suffers from agonistic apraxia, known as the alien hand syndrome. And this is a real syndrome, believe it or not.
Yeah, it is. I just assumed that.
I thought it was made up.
Yeah. Well, he's a former Nazi scientist. He emigrated to the United States, but it's like the right hand was so used to giving the Nazi salute that the hand still had allegiance. When I was reading it, basically their hemispheres are really separated on their brains. So it's like one. Yeah,
it says caused by damage to the corpus callosum, the nerve fibers that connect the two brain's hemispheres. And they actually called it the Dr. Strangelove syndrome. They said that patients would say things. They'd slam their hand down and shout, "My hand does things that I don't want it to." So that's very unfortunate.
Yes.
In Dr. Strangelove case, it's always trying to salute Hitler.
Or strangle him.
Yeah, and strangle him. And at one point he's biting it, and doing all these crazy things. So they're talking about this doomsday machine, and it's a very bleak situation at this point. They realize they're in a lot of trouble. And one of the things I noted was how Turgison is constantly chewing gum, like you mentioned, just gum after gum, like he's just constantly putting gum in his mouth. And then you go back to the base and you see this fight breaking out between all the American soldiers that are killing each other. And while this is happening, there's this humongous sign that says, "Peace is our profession." Yeah,
that's the actual
Strategic Air Command's slogan. They didn't just throw that in. That was a real sign there. But Ripper, he's got his gun. He's shooting the soldiers. And then he goes back to sitting on the floor and talking more about this fluoridation. He's like obsessed with this subject. And again, Ripper's being shown from a different angle. He's shown from a low angle where Mandrake is more straight on. And then the base surrenders. And that makes Ripper very upset. And he's very disappointed. Mandrake's still trying to talk sense into him. And then he starts asking Mandrake if he was a prisoner of war and if he was tortured. And Mandrake is kind of like, "Well, yes, but I don't really like to talk
fuck about it. Yeah,
and he said he was tortured by the Japanese, and then he says, I feel like they just did it for fun, but they do make good cameras.
Bloody good cameras.
I thought that was a really funny line.
Yeah.
And so then at this point, he's trying to get off the subject of torture. And because Ripper's saying, I don't think I could withstand torture. And he says, why don't you just give me the recall code? Ripper goes into the bathroom and he's still talking about the recall code. And then you hear this gunshot, boom.
He's like, oh, you're gonna wash up before? No, don't leave him alone like that.
Yes. And then, and you know that Ripper has shot himself.
Yeah.
And then it goes back to Kong. He's flying. And now one of the things they decided in the war room when they found about this doomsday machine is that they had to go out and let their planes get shot down, the planes that were going to the targets. I don't think we mentioned that.
They were trying to help the premier of the Russians find where the planes are. They gave them the targets where they were going to.
Yeah. What I think we forgot to mention is that the whole plan R was that these pilots that were out and about, they're kind of like watching the space. The plan R meant that they were supposed to go to targets and shoot in Russia. That's what the plan R was. And that's what these pilots were doing. And then apparently what they then found out was that if they do this, the doomsday machine will activate. Nobody can stop it, and it blows up the whole world.
Yeah.
So that's basically what the whole thing was.
That was the Russian deterrent where
Yeah.
they couldn't keep up with the space race, the arms race, or the peace race. Their device was just to bury the bombs in the ground. So once something was triggered, everything underneath, and
Just-
what was the cobalt thorium
Yep.
G?
Yep, there's something like that.
So that's actually was a real thing where they could get more radiation fallout from the bombs.
The planes are flying. They think this is supposed to be their mission. And now what's happening is the Russians are allowed to shoot these planes down. And this is a shot in the B-52, and they see that a missile is coming. This is a really good job of doing the tension again. He's reading out the coordinates as the missile is coming closer. There's
10
all these
miles.
shots of
Yeah.
close-ups on all the guys. It's really well done. Again, this is very similar to the Bedford incident. This reminds me exactly of the scene of the Bedford incident. It's almost identical. And I do think this film was done before the Bedford incident, if I remember correctly. So it's a very tense scene. And what eventually happens is the missile hits the plane. And then again, a really good job by the cinematographer and the editor showing this chaos by jerking the camera around, making the lights flash on and off. You get this very erratic camera work at this point. So it looks very chaotic, and people are trying to put out the fire and all this stuff. Really, really good job in this scene by the cinematographer and the editor. And it's going to cut back and forth to the inside of the plane, the outside of the plane kind of tailing off and all this. It's very interesting. So that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the fire out. They're trying to get the plane back in order. And then it goes back to Mandrake, and he's figured out the recall code. And he's very excited. He's going to go tell somebody, but he can't because Colonel Bat Guano,
Yes.
played by Keenan Wynn.
Oh,
Keenan
yes.
Wynn is a great character actor. He shoots into the room, and he's going to take him into custody. And Mandrake's trying to tell him, I got to call the president. I've got to call SAC. I've got to tell them about this. And Keenan Wynn's not having it. He's like, nope.
As dry as you can be. He's like,
You're coming with me. You're,
sure thing, bud.
What's going on here? How did this guy in the bathroom die?
How to get by, and then all of a sudden there's a British guy here. Like he doesn't know what his situation is. Like why is he there?
Yeah, exactly.
And we forgot to mention after Major Kong's plane is hit by the missile, it destroys their receiver, so they can't get the code.
Well, that was the next part. It's also back and forth. That it goes so quickly back and forth. But all that happens is Mandrake is trying to argue with Guano, and he keeps just taking him and apprehending him. And then it goes back to the Kong, and the airplane is getting stabilized. But they say the radio gear is out. They're leaking fuel. They have to fly very low. So they're kind of under the radar.
Yep.
And then quickly right back to Guano, and he's taking Mandrake down the hall forcibly, like at gunpoint.
Yeah.
And Mandrake says, I have to call the president, and they come to a payphone.
Yes.
And he tries to call him, but he doesn't have enough change to get the call through.
And so he tries to place a collect call to the White House, and they won't accept the charges.
And then he's like station to station, and he didn't have enough change for that either. So he tells Guano, go shoot that Coca-Cola machine there. And Guano's like, we can't destroy
That's private property.
That's private property.
That's private property.
You're going to have to answer to the Coca-Cola company. He's all completely oblivious and clueless. So finally, he convinces him to shoot the Coca-Cola machine, and all this change comes out, and he's able to make his call. And then we see the war room. They're all excited because the recall code is correct. The bombers are being recalled. Everybody everybody's happy. Turgeson's starting this prayer, that he's leading in this prayer, and then all of a sudden you get cut back to the Kong plane, and it's running low on fuel, but it's still flying. And then right back to the war room, and the president is on the phone with the premier now, and now they're telling them there's one plane not accounted for.
That was the great line. The assistant, he's like, Premier Kissoff's on the phone. He's hopping mad. Like, what?
And he says one plane's not accounted for, and they said, hey, look, all of our planes are accounted for. There's 4 that were shot down, and all the rest have been recalled. They said, oh, well, by the way, there's not 4 that were shot down. We made a mistake. And then, of course, Turgeson's like, is this a conspiracy? They're doing this on purpose. You know, he obviously wants to blame something on them. And so they said, well, if this plane goes and reaches its target, like we suspect it's going to do, will the doomsday machine go off? And they said, oh, yes, it still will. And they're like, okay, well, then you know where the primary target is. You know where the plane's going. We're telling you this is the plane's target. Go and shoot the plane down. But then you go back to the Kong plane and they say, oh, we don't have enough fuel to get to the primary target. And they said, well, we're not just going to do nothing. Let's find something. Yeah. And so they changed their target.
Whatever the closest they can get to.
Let's just get to the closest one. And then they're back again in the war room, and the president and Turgeson are again having kind of a fight. And this is a nice scene too, because the president is in the forefront, Turgeson is in the forefront, and they have the men lined up in the background in the dark, and they're kind of lit. It's really interesting the way they do a lot of these scenes. I really like the cinematography in this.
And I'm sitting here and it's like, we're in the mid 60s. Keller's been around for a while. You could not do this movie in color at all.
No,
it's
this is one of those
black
movies.
And white.
Yeah, this is one of those movies where I say black and white was not done because it was all that was available. It was done as an artistic choice. Yeah. And there's so many movies like that. People don't understand that concept for some reason. But the president's kind of asking Turgeson, can the plane go through? And he's doing these over dramatics and this big, like his arms. And he's just very over the top. And he's like, oh, it can go through. Yeah. So, he thinks it can. And
can he do it? Yeah, he can. And he's like, he's so excited. Then
he's almost like proud.
He's so proud. But he's like, oh, well, then that's not good.
That's not good. Yeah, the world will be destroyed. But our guys will do it.
Our boys can pilot that plane. That baby can get so low and you never believe it.
Yeah. And then this is the last bit I'm going to mention because we're getting very close to the end and I don't want to do a spoiler, but you get a close-up back to the Kong plane. You get your close-ups of the crew cutting back and forth, the inside of the plane, the outside of the plane, and then you see a lot of that Arctic Circle footage that was at this scene. And they note that the bomb door circuits are not working. Actually, James Earl Jones tells him this. And then you really hear that drumming and the song, but you hear a lot of that drumming by itself without the song. Again, we're ramping up the tension a lot with that drumming. So Kong decides he's going to go down to fix the bomb doors. I noticed the bombs say hi there and dear John. Yeah. So he's sitting on the bomb trying to fix the electrical wiring for the bomb doors, that he's sitting on the hi there bomb. And I don't want to say anything further. I just feel like anything else we say is going to be a spoiler.
Strangelove speech at the end?
We will say that there is a great Strangelove speech where he does a lot of really crazy
antics.
Yeah, antics. And then they said that actually they had a really hard time with shooting that scene because people wouldn't stop laughing. Peter Bull, he's like, he's just, keep it together, keep it together. Yeah, I mean, he's just so, Peter Sellers is just really honestly funny. I guess we should mention the character of General Buck Turgeson is patterned after the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Curtis LeMay, who was renowned for his extreme anti-communist views and who once stated that he would not be afraid to start a nuclear war with the Soviet Union if he was elected president, which oddly enough, he wasn't elected.
Yes, thank you.
And then they said, similarly, Brigadier General Jack D. Ripper was patterned after General Thomas S. Power, who was LeMay's protege and successor as Chief of the Strategic Air Command. When briefed on a RAND proposal to limit U.S. nuclear strikes in Soviet cities at the beginning of the war, Power responded, "Restraint? Why are you concerned about saving their lives? The whole idea is to kill the bastards. At the end of the war, if there's 2 Americans and 1 Russian, we win." That was what the guy said.
No.
So supposedly that's what these people are based on.
Yeah.
I don't think we talked much about Peter Sellers. Peter Sellers, his parents were variety stage performers. He was an only child who would travel around with his parents in different theater troupes. I think it's really sad. He was apparently very isolated in his childhood. It was really, really quite sad. He took up drumming as a teenager, and he was a very proficient drummer. They said he could have been like a professional jazz musician. Wow. He was in the RAF during the war in a touring entertainment troupe. He got his big break in Stanley Kubrick's Lolita and then in The Pink Panther after Peter Ustinov dropped out. He was nominated for 3 Oscars, including this film. He never won. And sadly, he died of a heart attack at a mere age 54. He had had heart problems for years. And the film that he should have won the Academy Award for is Being There. The film Being There. It's an excellent film. He plays sort of this special needs character, and he does it very subtly and very well. It's a brilliant performance. He should definitely won. It's really a shame. This film was $2 million to produce. It was a critical and box office success, and it was AFI's, American Film Institute, which you spoke of, number 3 comedy of all time.
Yeah, and I guess we didn't talk about how there was another movie in production, Failsafe, at the same exact time, and he's like, well, this can't come out before my movie, so they sued him, and it still came out the same year, but like 8 months.
That was a Sidney Lumet film with Henry Fonda in, and that film wound up doing not very good. Nope. And I think it was directly because of this, which is a shame. I
think it's made
and it wasn't that similar at all, because it certainly wasn't a black comedy.
No, he stole elements from the book that he had it based on.
They were trying to claim that, yes. I don't think it was actually accurate.
Was that his gamesmanship as the chess player,
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, the chess player thing.
Yeah. So I forgot to mention about the chess playing. George C. Scott, he fancied himself a big chess player, and then Kubrick was kind of worried that he couldn't really keep him under control because he had a reputation of volatile.
Yes.
So he kept the chessboard on the set and just whipped him pretty much the entire production. That's got to be a bruise to your ego for that guy.
Yeah, well, it's surprising they were able to film anything the way George C. Scott always insisted on playing something until he won. It'd be like just playing chess the whole time. But here on a Silver Screen Time Machine, we do a film rating. So you as the guest, it's 1 to 5. 5 being the best, 1 being the worst. What would you rate Dr. Strangelove?
That's a 5 for me.
Oh, it's a 5.
It's 5. It's my favorite Kubrick movie, probably my favorite comedy, even though aptly named a nightmare comedy, because you can sit and watch this movie and you're just like, like that nervous chuckle. It's like, oh, that's funny. And it's scary at the same time. I think it's scary. I remember watching an interview with Steven Spielberg. It's like, this movie scared the hell out of me.
Yeah.
I was a
well,
kid.
I'm sure. Yeah, especially in that day and age. Yeah, it was almost like the Orson Welles War of the Worlds radio program, like terrified everybody. I'm going to give it a 4, which is generally my ranking for films that I like. I don't like the music at all. I mean, I like the song. I don't like the very loud, repetitive, constant song when he's playing and no other music anywhere else. I thought that was a really strange thing there. I really love the cinematography. I thought it was excellent job. The editing, excellent job. The acting, excellent. I don't love watching actors play over-the-top characters, but I think in George C. Scott's case, it was actually warranted, and it really helped to make the film funny. I think if he had played it less over the top, the comedy would have been missed. So I think that was an important component, although normally I hate that, but I don't mind it in this film. Yeah. But I did think the acting was really good. Peter Sellers was excellent. So 4.
Okay. Yeah. With the overreacting, you just have to look at these. It's just like either a critique, because I know Kubrick was just terrified of nuclear war and all that, but it's just making fun of these higher-ups, and that might have been part of his back, like, I want to make this guy look ridiculous, Yeah,
I think it works for this film. It would be like if Peter Sellers didn't play Dr. Strangelove over the top. It wouldn't have been as funny.
This is a perfect double feature with Manchurian Candidate. It's just as perfect as political movies. You got the thriller and you got the comedy. And it's like, do you want to be like, oh, you feel terrible at the end? Or do you want to be like, feel terrible at the end, but you kind of laugh along the way?
Well, I actually think this is a perfect double feature with the Bedford incident. There's a ton of similarities in the films. They were done by the two partners that worked together for so long. They're both about paranoia about Russians in the nuclear Cold War. It's actually like a perfect companion piece to the Bedford incident, which a lot of people don't know about. So watch Dr. Strangelove and watch the Bedford incident and tell me if there's not a lot of similarities in those films. Well, anyway, we better wrap up. This is getting a little long. I want to thank you so much for being our guest today, Mark.
Thank you, Wendy. This is great. I'm going to have to find some more movies to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So for Silver Screen Time Machine, Wendy's Classic Film Review, this is Wendy saying goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast today. Please don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. And please leave us a comment or a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Intro and outro music composed by Heidi Engel. Artwork by Tyler Birch. Produced and edited by Wendy Whittick. Recorded at PCTV Studios, Pittsburgh, PA. See you next time.